Okay, welcome to part 2. My phone, again, randomly shut off, but we're good now. And here was the situation, the seating situation. You got the blonde lady and Julian's mom across the aisle, Julian and the black man. So Julian's saying, I hope that the lady will squeeze in here next to my mom, and that the little boy, her little boy, will sit there. Oh, please let a black lady sit next to my mom. He's just thrilled that this might happen. I just read that. Okay. Julian hoped that he would sit down. Julian hoped that he would sit down beside him, and that the woman would push in beside his mother. He could think of no better arrangement. As she waited for her tokens, the woman was surveying the seating possibilities. He hoped with the idea of sitting where she was least wanted. There was something familiar-looking about her, but Julian could not place what it was. She was a giant of a woman. Her face was set not only to meet opposition, but to seek it out. The downward tilt of her large lower lip was like a warning sign, "Don't tamper with me." Her bulging figure was encased in a green crepe dress, and her feet overflowed in red shoes. She had on a hideous hat. A purple velvet flap came down on one side of it and stood up on the other. The rest of it was green and looked like a cushion with the stuffing out. It's the same hat. No, Julian and his mother don't recognize this yet, but it's just part of, Flannery O'Connor just puts it in as part of the description. But if you paid attention to the description of his mother's hat, it's literally the exact same sentence. Purple velvet flap that comes down on one side and stands up on the other, and a green cushion with stuffing out. Same exact description. The woman also carried a mammoth red pocketbook that bulged throughout as if it were stuffed with rocks. To Julian's disappointment, the little boy climbed up on the empty seat beside his mother. His mother lumped all children, black and white, into the common category of cute, and she thought little black children were, on the whole, cuter than little white children. She smiled at the boy as he climbed out on the seat. Meanwhile, the woman was bearing down upon the empty seat beside Julian. To his annoyance, she squeezed herself into it. He saw his mother's face change as the woman settled herself next to him, and realized with satisfaction that this was more objectionable to her than it was to him. Her face seemed almost gray, and there was a look of dull recognition in her eyes, as if suddenly she had sickened at some awful confrontation. Julian saw it was because she and the woman had, in a sense, swapped sons. Though his mother would not realize the symbolic significance of this, she would feel it. His amusement showed plainly on his face. Alright, so let me show you. We're going to call this woman Doppelganger. Alright, so here's the seating arrangement. You still got the blonde lady and Julian's mother, and Julian's mother's doppelganger sat down between Julian's mother and the blonde lady. What's a doppelganger, you're probably asking yourself. A doppelganger is a double, kind of like an evil twin sometimes, or it could just be somebody who's a lot like you with only one or two things different, and you're meant to compare and contrast those two things. Well, this woman is an overweight woman with the same exact hat as Julian's mother, only she's African American, so it's kind of interesting that she has a similar experience coming onto the bus with her son. Now, her son's a lot younger, as you're going to find out. He's like probably 4 or 5. But the thing that Julian's excited about, he realizes, is that it seems like the mothers have switched sons because of the seating arrangements. Because you have Julian's mom next to... Did I mess this up? Oh yeah, I messed this up. The doppelganger and the doppelganger son should switch spots. Julian's mother is actually next to the doppelganger son, and Julian is next to the doppelganger. In other words, it's almost like the doppelganger and Julian are mother and son, and Julian's mother and the little boy are mother and son. And she realizes the switch. Julian's mother realizes that that's kind of weird, and that's actually more offensive to her than having the large black lady sit next to her. Though his mother would not realize the symbolic significance of this, she would feel it. His amusement showed plainly on his face. The woman next to him muttered something unintelligible to herself. She was conscious of a kind of... Julian was conscious of a kind of bristling next to him, a muted growling like that of an angry cat. So he's sitting next to the black lady. He could not see anything but the red pocketbook upright on the bulging green thighs. He visualized the woman as she had stood waiting for her tokens. The ponderous... Come on, Corb. The ponderous figure, rising from the red shoes upward over the solid hips, the mammoth bosom, the haughty face to the green and purple hat. Then his eyes widened. The vision of the two hats, identical, broke upon him with the radiance of a brilliant sunrise. His face was suddenly lit with joy. He could not believe that fate had thrust upon his mother such a lesson. He gave a loud chuckle so that she would look at him and see that he saw. She turned her eyes on him slowly. The blue in them seemed to have turned a bruised purple. For a moment he had an uncomfortable sense of her innocence, but it lasted only a second before principle reassured him. Justice entitled him to laugh. His grin hardened until it said to his mother, as plainly as if it were saying aloud, "Your punishment exactly fits your pettiness. This should teach you a permanent lesson." So he's like, oh my goodness, I realize what is similar about them. They're both wearing the same hat. Oh man. So he turns and looks at her hat and looks at his mother like, you guys are wearing the same hat. In other words, he's trying to make his mom feel stupid for buying the same hat that an African-American woman would. Oh my goodness, you bought the same hat as her. You dumb woman, he's trying to tell his mother without saying it. Okay. Her eyes shifted to the woman. She seemed unable to bear looking at him and to find the woman preferable. He became conscious again of the bristling presence at his side. The woman was rumbling like a volcano about to become active. His mother's mouth began to twitch slightly at one corner. With a sinking heart, he saw incipient signs of recovery on her face and realized this was going to strike her suddenly as funny and was going to be no lesson at all. So he's like, she sees that they have the same hat, but she's so dumb she doesn't even understand that this should teach her a lesson. She thinks it's just a funny coincidence. It's like all going to be wasted, he thinks. With a sinking heart, he saw incipient signs of recovery on her face and realized this was going to strike her suddenly as funny and was going to be no lesson at all. She kept her eyes on the woman, and an amused smile came over her face as if the woman were a monkey that had stolen her hat. The little black boy was looking up at her with large, fascinated eyes. He had been trying to attract her attention for some time. "Carver," the woman said suddenly, "come here." When he saw that the spotlight was on him, Carver drew his feet up and turned himself toward Julian's mother and giggled. "Carver," the woman said, "you hear me? Come here." Carver slid down from the seat, but remained squatting with his back against the base of it. His head turned slyly around toward Julian's mother, who was smiling at him. So Carver's misbehaving. He's across the aisle from his mother, and he's kind of goofing around. He turns into Julian's mom and is like cuddling her, and the woman's like, "Carver, get over here." She's going to want him to come sit on her lap because he's not sitting still. And then he sinks to the floor, and he's got his back against the seat, and he's still looking up at Julian's mom, being silly. Haha. Carver's mama ain't having that. Okay. Carver slid down from the seat, but remained squatting with his back against the base of it. His head turned slyly around toward Julian's mother, who was smiling at him. The woman reached a hand across the aisle and snatched him to her. He righted himself and hung backwards on her knees, grinning at Julian's mother. "Isn't he cute?" Julian's mother said to the woman with the protruding teeth. So now the mama grabs him quick, puts him on her lap, and now he's sitting there, and he's still staring at her and being silly and playing goofy with her. And she says, "Oh, isn't he cute?" to the lady next to her. "I reckon he is," the woman said without conviction. The black woman yanked him upright, but he eased out of her grip and shot across the aisle and scrambled, giggling wildly onto the seat beside his new love. "I think he likes me," Julian's mother said, and smiled at the woman. It was the smile she used when she was being particularly gracious to an inferior. Julian saw everything lost. The lesson had rolled off her like rain on a roof. The woman stood up and yanked the little boy off the seat as if she were snatching him from a contagion. Julian could feel the rage in her at having no weapon like his mother's smile. She gave the child a sharp slap across his leg. He howled once and then thrust his head into her stomach and kicked his fret against her shins. "Behave!" she said vehemently. The bus stopped and the black man who had been reading the newspaper got off. The woman moved over and set the little boy down with a thump between herself and Julian. She held him firmly by the knee. In a moment he put his hands out in front of his face and peeped at Julian's mother through the fingers. "I see you," she said, and put her hand in front of her face and peeped at him. The woman slapped his hand. "Quit your foolishness," she said, "before I knock the living Jesus out of you." Ouch. Julian was thankful that the next stop was theirs. Julian was thankful that the next stop was theirs. He reached up and pulled the cord. The woman reached up and pulled it at the same time. Oh my God, he thought. He had the terrible intuition that when they got off the bus together, his mother would open her purse and give the little boy a nickel. This gesture would be as natural to her as breathing. The bus stopped, and the woman got up. Okay, so Julian realizes, oh, our stop's coming up. He pulls the thing to tell the bus driver to stop, and the woman, the black woman with Carver, the son, pulls the string too to tell the bus driver to stop. And Julian's like, oh my gosh, this lady quite obviously does not like us. And I know what my mom's going to do. Every time we see a cute little kid, she always wants to give him a nickel. When we get off the bus, this lady's going to be like, my son's not going to take your nickel. And Julian's freaking out. The gesture would be as natural to her as breathing. The bus stopped, and the woman got up and lunged to the front, dragging the child, who wished to stay on, after her. Julian and his mother got up and followed. As they neared the door, Julian tried to relieve her of her pocketbook. "No," she murmured. "I want to give that little boy a nickel." "No," Julian hissed. "No." She smiled down at the child and opened her bag. The bus door opened, and the woman picked him up by the arm and descended with him hanging at her hip. Once in the street, she set him down and shook him. Julian's mother had to close her purse while she got down the bus step, but as soon as her feet were on the ground, she opened it again and began to rummage inside of it. "I can't find but a penny," she whispered, "but it looks like a new penny." "Don't do it," Julian said fiercely between his teeth. There was a street light on the corner, and she hurried to get underneath it so she could see better into her pocketbook. But the woman was heading off rapidly down the street with her child hanging backwards on her hand. "Oh, little boy," Julian's mother called, and took a few quick steps and caught up with them just beyond the lamppost. "Here's a bright new penny for you." And she held out the coin, which shone bronze in the dim light. The huge woman turned, and for a moment she stood, her shoulders lifted and her face frozen with frustrated rage, and she stared at Julian's mother. Then, all at once, she seemed to explode like a piece of machinery that had been given 1 ounce of pressure too much. Julian saw the black fist swing out with the red pocketbook. He shut his eyes and cringed as he heard the woman shout, "He don't take nobody's pennies!" And when he opened his eyes, the woman was disappearing down the street with the little boy staring wide-eyed over her shoulder. Julian's mother was sitting on the sidewalk. "Ugh! I told you not to do that," Julian said angrily. "I told you not to do that." He stood over her for a minute, gritting his teeth. Her legs were stretched out in front of her, and her hat was on her lap. So yes, you understood that correctly. Julian's mom walks up to the little boy to give him a penny, and the lady's like, "We don't take no pennies." Bam! And smashes her on the head with the purse, which really is kind of assault and battery. It's kind of a way overreaction, but at the same time, she's interpreting this gesture as somehow racist because, oh, you think my son needs your pennies. Well, we don't take no pennies from white people. We got enough money for ourselves. And you can understand that, but then to swing the purse and whack her in the head is kind of too much. Okay. He stood over her for a minute, gritting his teeth. Her legs were stretched out in front of her, and her hat was on her lap. He squatted down and looked her in the face. Her face was totally expressionless. "You got exactly what you deserved," he said. "Now get up." That's the son he is? His mother just got whacked on the head, and he kneels down, looks her in the eyes, and says, "You got what you deserved." Okay. He picked up her pocketbook and put what had fallen out back in. He picked up the hat off her lap. The penny caught his eye on the sidewalk, and he picked that up and let it drop before her eyes into the purse. Then he stood up and leaned over and held his hands out to pull her up, but she remained immobile. He sighed. Rising above them on either side were black apartment buildings, marked with irregular rectangles of light. At the end of the block, a man came out of a door and walked off in the opposite direction. All right, he said. Now, suppose somebody happens by here and wants to know why you're sitting on the sidewalk. So he's trying to be like, come on, Mom, get up off the sidewalk. People are going to start asking why an old